So the two heavy hitters in their respective countries is going to be Joseph Stalin building a socialist society in the Soviet Union in the 20s and 30s, and then Mao is going to do the exact same thing in China, but this time in the 1950s and 60s. And there's going to be a lot of parallels here. There's also going to be some differences, just simply because of the scenarios and the situation that exists in Russia, or exists in the Soviet Union versus the situation, the problem that exists within China here as well. For both of them, the first step is going to be modernization and industrialization. Both of these countries are amazingly behind, and they have to attempt to catch up. Both are going to create a political system that's going to be dominated by the Communist Party, where we have high ranking party members who are expected to exemplify socialism. All other parties are going to be forbidden. And again, the hallmark of a communist system is going to be that that the state is going to control almost the entire economy. Now, in regards to women, again, just like with everything else that we're going to see in this section, there's going to be some similarities, and of course, there's going to be some differences. The one thing here that I want to mention, and I did mention it in an earlier section, but you want to put here next to capital A, you want to put, please, here that there's more progress than in Western countries. There's more progress than in Western countries. Again, your equality or your equity is based upon your ability to labor. And since a woman can be a worker in the same way that a man can be a worker and is also exploited as a worker, then, that gender difference just sort of kind of like, scratches itself out. The communist countries in general are going to pioneer women's liberation. And this is going to be a big difference from what we see with feminism in the West, where here, feminism is going to largely be directed by the state. Now, a little bit of a spoiler alert. This is going to be a problem once these communist systems, especially in Russia and Eastern Europe, start to fall. You have a lot of these institutions that are just going to be done away with because they're associated with communism, even if they do actually help out women. So there's going to be this, big thing that we'll deal with in a later section. The Soviet Union almost immediately declared full legal and political equality for women, where divorce, abortion, pregnancy leave, and women's work were all enabled or encouraged. In 1919, the Soviet Party, the Communist Party, set up Zenadol, which is the women's department. And the purpose of this was to push a feminist agenda. Um, However, you want to put down here next to A underneath number 2, because there's going to be two big buts with this. The first one here, I want you to write down. You want to put, please, that women's impact within the party was limited. Women's impact within the party was limited. I mean, they're useful during the revolution, but as soon as the revolution is over, all of a sudden, there tends to be a pretty low glass ceiling for women within the Communist Party. Like, for example, none of the upper level leadership is going to be female. It's going to be exclusively men and male dominated. So even though they are giving lip service to women, in reality, there's a limit. And in fact, Stalin is going to abolish Zenadol in 1930, and he's going to basically claim that, the women's question, the women's issues have all been solved. So why do we need to have this separate women's department? Again, in communist China, they're also going to work for women's equality. We have the marriage law in 1950 that orders free choice in marriage, easier divorce, end of concubinage and child marriage, and equal rights for women. So what's going on here in China is very similar to what's going on in Russia, that they're getting rid of kind of some of the traditional chains, some of the traditional limits that have been placed upon women. However, like I sort of kind of said above, There are some limitations on communist women's liberation. One, like I said earlier, Stalin is going to declare the women's question solved in 1930, which is the whole reason why he gets rid of Zenadal. There's also no direct attack in either state, either Russia or China, on male domination within the family. Like, even though there is liberation and freedom outside the home, inside the home, it's kind of like that same old male dominated patriarchal system. Women will retain the burden of housework and childcare as well as paid employment. In fact, being a good communist for women is going to be a little bit of a more complicated affair. In fact, you want to put down here somewhere in this particular section underneath number 4, and you want to start off with here to be a good woman, and put good woman in quotes, to be a quote unquote good woman. And there's going to be 3 things. 1, be a good mother slash wife, be a good mother slash wife. So that's where those traditional roles are going to still be reinforced. Second, a good worker, because again, the communist system requires good work and productive labor. So, woman is getting this equality based on their capacity to labor. And then finally, the third one is they have to be a good and active party member. They have to be a good and active party member. So instead of women just wearing the hat of being a good wife and mother, now in these communist societies, they also have to make sure that they're going and they're working hard. Because if you're not working hard, then you must be against the system, and being against the system is not necessarily a good life choice here. And on top of everything, you also have to be a good and participating party member. So you have to take care of your family, you have to work all day, go back and take care of your family, and then still participate in all of the party events, again, in order to show the loyalty to the state. And like I said before, the real wrinkle with all of this is in both places, very few women make it into top political leadership. In both Russia and in China, that leadership is male leadership. Again, in the countryside, in both states, communists are going to take land and estates and redistribute the land to the peasants. Because again, in both of these places, the peasants have a very, very prominent and a very, very vocal land hunger. So you're going to have both of these areas taking land from landed aristocracy, from noblemen, from large landowning peasants, and they're going to take it and they're going to distribute it. Now, this is where the difference, or the first set of differences, is going to occur. In Russia, the peasants took and redistributed the land themselves. This is not going to be a nice, smooth process. In China, land reform teams are going to mobilize poor peasants to confront their landlords and their wealthier peasants. In this second stage of rural reform, there's an effort to end private property and land by collectivizing agriculture. Remember, both of these countries are amazingly behind. I mean, they kind of haven't had that most recent phase of the agricultural revolution that in Western Europe allowed for the Industrial Revolution to take place. We still need to make agriculture as efficient as we possibly can. So in China, this collectivization is going to largely be peaceful. It's going to take place in the 1950s. In the Soviet Union, collectivization is going to be imposed by violence. In fact, you want to put down here next to B underneath number 2, do you want to put, please, that Stalin admitted to the death of 10 million because of collectivization. Stalin admitted to the death of 10 million because of collectivization. Now, this isn't only just simply the violence of, people not wanting to give up their land, so them being, executed or sent to Siberia to be lost to the unknown, but there's also a lot of, famine and starvation as a negative response to collectivization. So in Russia, it's going to be a much dirtier, a much, filthier and more violent affair. And guys, let's also face it. If Stalin is admitting to, yeah, probably 10 million people died during collectivization, you know that the numbers have got to be much greater than that. Because China's collectivization was largely peaceful, its collectivization goes further than the Soviet Union's does. With industrial development, both states are going to regard industrialization as fundamental because China is not industrialized at all. The only industrialization that might be there is the industrialization that is brought in and supported by the Europeans. And Russia is kind of only industrialized in quotes. I mean, their industrialization barely meets the definition of being industrialization. I mean, there's, a handful of factories. They're concentrating on heavy industry, not consumer goods. I mean, to call them an industrialized nation is kind of stretching things, just a little bit. China is going to largely follow the model established by the Soviet Union. So they will have a guide where the Soviet Union, in a lot of cases, is kind of, rocking around a little listless. China is able to look at what the Soviet Union does and is able to kind of follow their lead where the lead actually goes and pans out. Um, Here, there's going to be state ownership of property. There's going to be centralized planning, just like in the Soviet Union with 5-year plans. Priority is going to be given to heavy industry. The hope is with this heavy industry, like the making of steel, for example, that Russia in particular, Soviet Union in particular, is going to be able to sell this steel to European countries or the United States in exchange for consumer goods, where Russia and also China is not really concerned with making, shirts and the various things that people will individually purchase. There's also the massive mobilization of resources. There's intrusive party control to the whole process. And both countries are going to experience major economic growth. Now, here's the thing, and you want to put down here, and you're going to put this up at the top of your page because you just flipped on to page 5. Um, you want to put here next to F, and this is kind of like a 2-for-1 special. So you want to write small and kind of run this across the top. Do you want to put, please, here, this included a vast improvement to literacy and education, rapid urbanization, development of a privileged and technological elite. And then you want to put by this next note, you want to put a star by it because we kind of have to like temper this a little. You want to put, please, here, realize that both countries are coming from a weak economy and any growth is substantial. I mean, both of these countries, economically and developmentally, are kind of at the ground floor. So any upwards movement is going to look substantial, and there will be some upwards movement here. Now, some differences here is obviously the Soviet leadership is going to largely accept the social outcomes of industrialization. They know that there's going to be some problems, and they're sort of kind of okay with it. China under Mao is going to try to combat the social effects of industrialization by doing two things. One is the Great Leap Forward, which promoted small scale industrialization in rural areas. And the next one, this is going to be the big one. This is going to be the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. You want to put a star here by B underneath number 4. And you want to put down then next to B underneath number 4. You want to put down that this was intended to combat capitalist tendencies. In both places, there's a great confidence in central planning. However, the struggle against nature is going to lead to immense environmental damage. I mean, these guys are just simply going full steam ahead, and they're not really kind of worried about the long-term effects. Now, some other parallels between the Soviet Union and China are not necessarily going to be real warm and fuzzy to the extent that we have warm and fuzzy comparisons. And both the Soviet Union and China under Stalin and Mao were rife with paranoia. In fact, I need you to define rife. So you want to underline rife and just draw a little arrow over to the side and just define it as commonly occurring. I mean, both of these leaders and both of these governments underneath these leaders are kind of constantly obsessed with being undone from within or undone from outside forces. I mean, Stalin's going to openly say that they need to industrialize because they're surrounded by enemies outside of the Soviet Union. There's also going to be a lot of paranoia about people trying to undo the revolution from within. There's a constant fear that important communists were corrupted by bourgeois ideas and became class enemies. There's also the fear of a conspiracy by class enemies and for an imperialist to restore capitalism. Again, there is this fear that the revolution will end from within and also will end from outside. So because of this, in the Soviet Union, we have the terror or the purges in the late 1930s. And just to sort of kind of like sum up what these do, and you want to put a little star here by C underneath number 2, is that nearly 1 million people are going to be executed between 1936 and 1941. And these are all going to be seen as people who are enemies of the state. And in a lot of cases, Stalin is literally picking from the list of people to be executed. Like he'll be circling names that are going to get the axe, or in this case, be shot, and he's going to be crossing out names, those that are going to, be hanging around. The terror and the use of terror in the Soviet Union is going to be used not only throughout Stalin's rule, but also throughout the better part of the Soviet era. In China, the search for enemies was a little bit more of a public process. And this is going to be the Cultural Revolution, where it escapes the control of the communist leadership. You also want to put a little star there by A underneath number 3 here as well. The key feature in both of these is both the terror and the Cultural Revolution is going to discredit socialism and also contribute to the eventual collapse of the communist experiment. And you want to start off with a star by number 4. And then you want to put down next to number 4, put down that you can't say that your cause is humane and moral. You can't say that your cause is humane and moral if you murder millions. In other words, you can't take the high ground and say that you're better than the West or you're better than the evil exploiting capitalists when you're murdering millions and sending millions more off to prison camps. So this is going to work to discredit sort of that utopian or that warm fuzzy feeling that the communists in both of these countries are trying to portray.